From filmmaker Marcus Nispel comes the film that kickstarted the remake boom of the early to mid-2000s. A moderately budgeted horror flick with big production value and a Hollywood gloss that was unlike any of the entries that preceded it within the franchise, yet with a gritty and raw undertone that keeps the film from ever feeling like a run-of-the-mill early 2000s blockbuster. The 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Marcus Nispel and produced by the likes of Michael Bay, is one of those horror films that just leave a long-lasting impression on you. Was it a remake of what many, including myself, consider to be the holy grail of horror films? Yes, it was. But the fact that this movie is a reboot of that original film in no way affects that aforementioned long-lasting impression. This film really stands on its own and is a juggernaut in and of itself that is just packed with fantastic content. The fact that it's a remake never really comes into play within the film itself. Truly an all-new entity with an all-new attitude and identity comparatively to the original, all the while still finding ways to make little nods and callbacks to Tobe Hooper's classic 1974 film. We open with a tonally similar prologue, where the voice of John Larroquette, once again, informs the audience of the much-needed exposition regarding the subject matter and supposed true events of the film, which is a fantastic touch, and one that never really distracts from the film itself. Instead of an opening crawl, we instead get flashes of footage from the supposed actual crime scenes, which really enhances this artificial vibe that this film actually happened. We know we're in for a different film right from this opening sequence, because by showing us footage of the crime scene, the house where it all happened, and the authorities literally walking through the place, collecting evidence, we know full well that whatever happens in the film will eventually lead to these events, where police descend on the house, which is already itself a huge contrast to the original story and its first 2 or 3 sequels, where in that timeline, authorities were never able to actually make any arrests or even locate the house in the first place. Again, it's a little change, but one that really sets this film apart from the others right from the start. It's also important to note that authorities explicitly say the name Hewitt residence in Travis County, Texas, within this opening, letting audiences know this is not a Sawyer family story, nor is it one that takes place in or around the town of Newt. As the opening scene concludes, we flash back to August 18th, 1973, the same story date of the original film, but with a different cast of young characters, on their way to a Lynyrd Skynyrd concert on their way back from a trip to Mexico. There's still 5 of them, they're still around the same age as that original group, but instead of siblings visiting the remains of an old family homestead with their friends, these young adults are really just passing through this remote stretch of southern Texas. In this film, there is no Sally, no Franklin, no Kirk or Pam, and certainly no Jerry. In their place, we have Erin, played by Jessica Biel, who is this film's lead and the equivalent to her 1974 Sally Hardesty counterpart. We have Kemper, played by Eric Balfour, who is sort of this film's Jerry equivalent. We have Andy and Pepper, played respectively by Mike Vogel and Erica Learson, who are this movie's Pam and Kirk. And of course, we have the 5th member of the group, last but not least, Morgan, played by Jonathan Tucker, who isn't really the counterpart to Franklin from the original film. He's not Erin's brother, nor is he wheelchair-bound, but he's that 5th member of the group no less. Now, I have to make a statement about these characters, and I want to reinforce to you that this is coming from the mouth of somebody who absolutely loves the original film, considers it to be one of the best horror films of all time, and will defend that movie relentlessly. here it goes. This remake boasts a better cast when it comes to the 5 main young adult characters. They're simply explored a bit more, have more likable personalities, and feel more like real people. And that's not meant as a slight to the characters of the original film, or the actors who portrayed them. I love all those guys and gals. They were perfect for that film. But let me put it to you like this. Who would you rather hang out with, or travel across the country with? I'm gonna go with the remake cast. But that's just me. After some banter about destiny, some factual information about STDs, and a small argument about buying weed in Mexico, the gang soon runs into this film's new version of the hitchhiker by almost running her over. After failing to truly make contact with her, but knowing she's badly in need of help, the gang decides to give her a lift to wherever she needs to go, which I would assume to be the hospital if I was in their shoes, but whatever. The hitchhiker, played to perfection by Lauren German, weirds out the gang, but this time not by taking photos or talking about head cheese or trying to slice them open with razor blades, but instead about the horrible man she claims to have just escaped from, and that they're going the wrong way. After she lunges for the steering wheel and tells them that they're all going to die, the young woman pulls a pistol from underneath her dress, seemingly from, well, you know where, and proceeds to blow her damn head off right there on the spot, blowing a brain-laced hole right through the back of the van window, petrifying our ragtag gang of pot-smoking concert-goers. This scene alone really sets the vibe and tone of the film from here on out, and lets us as the audience sort of know what to expect from its remainder, and also lets those of us who knew the original film that things were not going to play out in the same way as the '74 classic. After the expected squabble between the characters regarding what to do with this dead girl now that she's thrown a big wrench in their concert plans, the gang soon decides to head into town and see about leaving her with the proper authorities in hopes of salvaging their day and still somehow making it to the concert. After stopping at a local mom and pop, the characters meet an elderly shop owner named Mrs. Luda May, played by the late and great Marietta Merrick, who dials the sheriff for them and tells them to meet him at the old mill. The gang, naturally, feels really weirded out about driving even further across town with this dead chick in their van. But what are you gonna do, right? If the sheriff says the old mill, then you drive to the old mill. Nothing suspicious about this request, or the demeanor of Luda May at all. Nothing to worry about. I think we need to take a moment and just bask in how glorious the cinematography and set design in this film is. Not only is the production design team going beast mode on the locations and set dressings and all that stuff, but the man, myth, and legend, cinematographer Daniel Pearl, is pulling no punches when it comes to the look of this film. Rich and desaturated and contrasty and just, it looks almost like a gritty oil painting come to life. And for those of you that don't know, Daniel Pearl also shot the original 1974 film. Talk about a crazy full circle, huh? The sheriff, assumingly running late, doesn't show up until quite some time after the gang first arrives at the mill. In the meantime, they encounter some angry possums and a filthy little boy called Jedediah, played by David Dorfman, who insists to them that the sheriff is at home getting drunk. After finding a jarred photo of the hitchhiker, Aaron and Kemper decide to trudge off into the woods, intent on finding the sheriff's house, leaving Morgan, Andy, Pepper, and Jedediah back at the mill. Kemper and Aaron soon run into an enormous, aging plantation-style house and meet an elderly amputee named Old Monty, played by Terrence Evans, who agrees to let Aaron use the phone as long as Kemper remains outside. Monty dials the sheriff for her, how polite of him, and proceeds to go and empty his urine out into the toilet while she does so, before, of course, needing help from the young woman, who goes to his aid only to be groped by the old man as she does so. Kemper, having enough of the waiting, decides to go into the house himself and takes a look around, coming across filthy room after filthy room, before finally ending up in a small bedroom where a TV set plays old cartoons at extremely high volume. It's here that stuff really hits the fan, and in an abrupt way, not unlike the original film, we get our very first look at Remake Leatherface, coming out of nowhere with a sledgehammer and absolutely decimating Kemper with it, before aggressively dragging his twitching body off into the basement, and, in full tribute to the original film, slamming shut the giant slaughterhouse metal door. I remember everybody in the theater jumping in this scene when Leatherface first shows up, back in 2003. And although it plays differently, it was probably equally shocking to the first time Leatherface showed up in the '74 film. Abrupt, out of nowhere, visceral, and truly frightening. Back at the mill, Jedediah is chased off by Andy after poking the corpse with a stick, and soon thereafter, Sheriff Hoyt arrives on scene, here to save the day, played brilliantly by Arlie Ermey, in surely one of his best roles ever, and one of the highlights of both this movie and its 2006 prequel. After some hilariously dark banter and some truly crazy lines of dialogue, the boys help the sheriff wrap up, with saran wrap no less, the dead body of the hitchhiker, before proceeding to stuff her into his trunk. The happy sheriff bids them farewell, reinforces his oath to protect and serve, and drives the hell out of there. Aaron returns to the mill, looking for Kemper, assuming he must have returned by now, but realizes he's nowhere to be found. Andy agrees to go back to the house with Aaron in hopes of finding Kemper. After storming the house and finding nothing, Andy and Kemper soon face off against an angry Monty, who quickly calls forth the terrifying, monstrously sized Leatherface, going full Leatherface mode and chasing them out of the house with his chainsaw at full bore. He manages to slice off one of Andy's legs, dragging him back into the house as Aaron makes her terrified escape back toward the mill yet again. Leatherface is scary in this movie, and he seems less like a man suffering from some kind of mental illness, as he was in the first 4 films, and more like somebody who is simply angry with the world and full of some kind of indescribable rage, because this Leatherface is smart, cunning, seems to enjoy what he does. Even if this version still doesn't talk, there's something more on purpose about him than the other versions. After salting Andy's wounds and hanging him on a meat hook, Leatherface begins constructing a new mask from Kemper's own face, revealing his skin-diseased, riddled face beneath as he takes off the mask for a quick breather, the only time this really ever happens out of the entire franchise. Back at the mill, Morgan and Pepper are attempting to clean up the van, only to have a horrified Aaron return, telling them that they need to leave immediately. Before they can get the hell out of there, Hoyt returns, the good old sheriff he is, and finds the remnants of a joint in the van, ignoring all their pleas for help, and instead forcing them to the ground outside, as the criminals they are. Damn marijuana-smoking kids. Hoyt eventually takes Morgan into his car, after interrogating him in the back of the van, of course, and driving away from the mill, leaving Aaron and Pepper behind. But they won't be alone for long, as Leatherface, garbed in an all-new skin mask, shows up to keep them company, killing Pepper in cold blood and proceeding to stare at Aaron through the cut-out eye sockets of her very dead boyfriend, in what plays out as an extremely morbid and shocking exchange. After a chase sequence through the woods, Aaron comes upon a trailer owned by a woman named the Tea Lady, played gloriously by Kathy Lampkin, and a younger woman named Henrietta, played by Heather Kafka, who gives her tea that has been laced with some kind of drug. After discovering that the baby being held by Henrietta is actually the same baby from the submerged photo of the hitchhiker found earlier, Aaron tells Henrietta that the baby is not hers, but then proceeds to completely pass out in full blackout mode. Leatherface, his mother Luda May, Sheriff Hoyt, and Old Monty all greet Aaron at the Hewitt house as she awakes from her drug-induced nap. Luda May explains to Aaron that Leatherface suffered from a skin disease that disfigured his face, and that kids like her and her friends never treated Thomas, which is revealed to be the actual name of Leatherface in this continuity, with anything other than cruelty and ridicule. Although cannibalism itself doesn't really seem to be the blatant reason for this family's actions in this film, it remains a sort of subtext, hinted at here and there, especially with Monty's line,
"Maybe she'd like to stay for supper."
Judging by Leatherface's salting Andy's wounds earlier, I think we can all assume that Erin and her friends are all items on the menu at this point. Erin is soon dumped into the basement by Thomas, where she reunites with Andy, and after failing to help him off of the meat hooks, she begrudgingly kills him in a pity kill, much to the relief and request of Andy himself, which is a scene that actually plays quite morbid, morose, and extremely sad for the characters involved. It's actually a very powerful scene considering the type of film this is. Morgan is found handcuffed in a bathtub afterwards, and to their surprise, they encounter the young Jedediah once again, leading them both out of the house, but not before an angered Leatherface notices and begins chasing them, chainsaw in hand. Jedediah distracts Thomas long enough for them to escape into the woods, where they soon come across an abandoned shack and they barricade themselves inside. Naturally, Erin is discovered by Leatherface, but Morgan attacks him, only to be hung by his handcuffs from a chandelier. Leatherface then cuts through him vertically, from groin to sternum, leaving Erin as the sole survivor of this night of terror. After finding a slaughterhouse and a fantastically tense chase through the bowels of it, Erin finally gets the drop on Leatherface, chopping off one of his arms with a disgusting old meat cleaver and leaving the skin-masked madman to wallow in the slaughterhouse in sheer agony. Erin runs outside and flags down a trucker, played by Brad Leland, who willingly helps her into the truck and is eager to find her medical attention. But after Erin pulls the same nonsense as the hitchhiker from earlier by trying to forcibly steer the direction of the truck away from the town, the angry and shocked trucker stops to find help at the gas station, the very same station from earlier that day, and one where Luda May and Hoyt, coincidentally, are enjoying the company of the baby along with Henrietta. When the trucker bursts in talking about this crazed girl, the group heads outside, leaving the baby inside. At this point, Erin sneaks the baby out of the station and places the baby in the sheriff's car. She hotwires the car, and as Hoyt approaches the vehicle, she runs him over repeatedly until he is very, very, very dead. Leatherface suddenly appears in the road and slashes at the car with his chainsaw, but Erin manages to escape with the baby, and he watches in frustration as she drives away, not dancing in the streets in a frenzied rage, but simply staring intently and silently. 2 days later, 2 investigating officers are killed by Leatherface while doing a crime scene investigation of the Hewitt house, the same investigation and walkthrough we saw snippets of during the opening prologue of the film, with John Larroquette, naturally, closing out the film with some concluding narration as we see the supposedly only known image of Thomas Hewitt, the man they call Leatherface. This film was absolutely hardcore, and unlike so many Wonder Bread remakes of today, this film wasn't afraid to be downright dirty, gory, disgusting, and absolutely unapologetic in tone. The cast and crew did a phenomenal job with this movie, and again, it really does stand on its own as another rendition of the original story, without simply being known as the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was a huge hit for New Line Cinema and Platinum Dunes back in 2003, and it's become even more successful and has garnered an even bigger cult following in the nearly 2 decades since. It's hard to believe it's been that long, wow. But again, this film deserves all of the praise in the world. It's a juggernaut of a horror movie, a fantastic entry in the franchise overall, and definitely in the top 3 or 4 of the series overall, and it gave us a truly frightening Leatherface. I also think a lot of the visceral horror of this film comes from its presentation as this true story, much like the first film, but since we actually see quote-unquote real footage in the bookends of this film, with different names and settings over the original, I think this helped sell the film to people in this weird, oh, this is the real story the original film was based on kind of way, if that makes any sense, even though it's no more real than the '74 film. Big props to everyone involved in this movie, especially to cinematographer Daniel Pearl, composer Steve Jablonsky, who killed it with the original score in this movie. Also, Andrew Bernarski absolutely killed it as Leatherface in this movie too. And of course, director Marcus Nispel, who absolutely nailed this remake. Rest in peace to R. Lee Ermey, Terrence Evans, Marietta Merrick, and Kathy Lampkin. and apologies if I'm saying these names incorrectly. Also, the production of this movie took place in Texas, as did the 2006 prequel, so that's a good return to form for the series. No California, no Louisiana, Texas, where a chainsaw film should be filmed. With that said, Marcus Nispel's 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a masterpiece.